Welcome to the JACC podcast for September 30th, 2025. I'm Harlan Krumholz, Editor-in-Chief of JACC. In this episode, I'll walk you through the editor's page, original research articles, and viewpoints that are featured in this issue. For each paper, I'll summarize the abstract and offer one or two key takeaways from the introduction and discussion, plus reflections from related editorials. So let's get started. First, my editor's page on computable quality, the next frontier. Quality measurement was once a breakthrough. It allowed us to move beyond anecdotes and begin systematically assessing the care the patients received. But now it's fallen behind. Too slow, too expensive, too imprecise, and really, honestly, often too irrelevant to day-to-day clinical practice. It's time to reimagine quality measurement, not as these static report cards, but as something dynamic and useful. The next leap is what I call computable quality. Real-time, actionable intelligence derived from routine clinical data. We already know this can work. Think of the dramatic national improvement in door-to-balloon times for STEMI. It didn't require new drugs or devices. It was real-time tracking, transparency that saved lives. Computable quality means, first, accountability. Accountability with validated performance signals. Improvement driven by feedback at the point of care. Discovery from raw data that sheds light on outcomes, treatment, and equity. So again, accountability, improvement, discovery. Thanks to progress in AI, data integration, and interoperability, what was once aspirational is now technically feasible. The opportunity is to build a system that continuously learns, adapts, and raises the floor of care. Not to single out the best, but to ensure no patient receives less than excellent care. I wrote, quote, "The next leap requires a shift from static retrospective scorecards to what I call computable quality, living, real-time intelligence derived from routine clinical data," end of quote. This is our moment. If we choose it, we can finally create a true learning health system, one that continuously improves, reduces inequities, and ensures that every patient receives the best possible care. Okay, let's get to the original research. The first original research article, Pop-Up Cardiovascular Screening Within Community Pharmacies in an International Sporting Event. This study evaluated a pop-up cardiovascular screening program implemented in Australian community pharmacies and at a major international cricket match. And if you've seen those cricket matches, you know they're packed. In this study, more than 9,000 people were screened for blood pressure, atrial fibrillation, cholesterol, and lifestyle risk factors. Among them, 41% had previously undiagnosed cardiovascular risk factors, and 12% were referred for further evaluation. The study demonstrates that opportunistic screening in non-traditional venues is both feasible and effective. The authors emphasize that despite access to primary care, many people with modifiable risk factors remain undetected. Embedding health assessments into daily life venues like pharmacies or stadiums can help bridge gaps in prevention. An accompanying editorial commended the study's scale and community integration, but they argued that screening must be tied to action. Without built-in pathways to treatment, these initiatives risk falling short. As they wrote, quote, "Without bold new approaches, the projected surge in cardiovascular risk factors and disease threatens to reverse decades of progress in ASCVD prevention," end of quote. They call for screening models that link detection directly to care, whether through pharmacy-led interventions, digital referrals, or combination therapies at the point of care. A companion editor's note by Dr. Jason Wasfi reflected on the legacy of Shane Warne, the cricket legend who died of a preventable AMI at age 52. Wasfi emphasized that many middle-aged individuals, like those screened at the cricket match, remain unaware of their risk. He wrote, quote, "Let us all throughout the world share in honoring the memory of Shane Warne with our work. And let us all throughout the world share in stopping this disease from continuing to take far too many lives far too soon," end of quote. Next up, artificial intelligence automation of echocardiographic measurements. This study evaluated EchoNet measurements, a deep learning model trained on over 150,000 echocardiograms to automate 18 common echocardiographic parameters. The model showed strong agreement with expert manual assessments and consistent performance across patients and ultrasound vendors. Real-world deployment showed improved efficiency and reproducibility. The authors note that variability in echocardiographic measurements limits clinical decision-making and slows workflows. They argue that automation can reduce these problems while still requiring expert oversight. An editorial placed this work in the broader evolution of AI in cardiology. They highlighted the model's scale, transparency, and promise, but they also emphasized caution. They wrote, quote, AI systems like the one described here are likely to profoundly change our practice, but no matter how good these tools become, the ultimate responsibility will rest with the clinician in the driver's seat, end of quote. While the model can support rapid interpretation, it cannot yet replace expert judgment, they said, particularly for measurements that require contextual understanding or are susceptible to clinical misclassification. Next study, association between anticoagulant therapy and survival in pulmonary arterial hypertension, a registry report and an updated meta-analysis. This study investigated whether oral anticoagulant therapy improves survival in patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension. Using a large French registry, the authors compared outcomes for more than 2,000 patients stratified by anticoagulation status. The analysis showed no overall survival benefit of anticoagulation. However, among patients with idiopathic or heritable PAH, anticoagulation was associated with a significantly better survival. These results were supported by an updated meta-analysis. The findings suggest that anticoagulation might benefit a specific subgroups of PAH patients, particularly those without identifiable risk factors or comorbidities. For others, the benefit is unclear or may be offset by bleeding risks. An editorial pointed out that the role of anticoagulation in PAH has long been uncertain. They acknowledged that this study adds to a growing body of observational data, but noted the absence of high-quality randomized trials. They cautioned, quote, until randomized evidence catches up, anticoagulation in PAH remains a decision to be made on a case-by-case basis, grounded in careful patient selection and shared decision-making. The editorial underscores the challenge of balancing risk and benefit in rare diseases where trials are hard to conduct and clinical equipoise remains. Now, we have three viewpoints, all on TAVR for low-risk patients. First, reappraisal of evidentiary support for transcatheter aortic valve implantation for low-risk aortic stenosis by Sanjay Kaul. In this viewpoint, Dr. Kaul reassesses the evidence base for TAVR in low-risk patients, with 5-year follow-up now available from the PARTNER 3 and Evolute low-risk trials. He revisits whether current guideline recommendations remain justified. He points out that while early results favored TAVR, midterm outcomes show attenuation of that benefit. In PARTNER 3, TAVR was no longer superior to surgery at 5 years, and hazard ratios for death or disabling stroke reversed direction. He describes a possible catch-up phenomenon, where initial TAVR advantages fade or disappear over time. He notes important limitations in the trials, limited patient diversity, exclusion of bicuspid valves, and rising pacemaker and reintervention rates. He critiques recent meta-analyses for pooling heterogeneous trials with inconsistent follow-up. The central question he raises is whether the current Class 1 recommendations for TAVR in low-risk patients remains appropriate. He asks, quote, can we put the genie back in the bottle, end of quote, and suggests it may be time to downgrade the strength of the recommendation and proceed more cautiously in younger, low-risk populations. Now, the next viewpoint is low-risk patients, high-impact trials, rapidly evolving evidence for TAVR, viewpoint by Reddy, Windecker, and Ahmad. This viewpoint offers a rebuttal to Kaul's concerns. They argue that TAVR has earned and should maintain its Class 1 recommendation in low-risk patients. They point out that more than 10,000 participants across 11 randomized trials have compared TAVR and surgery, creating a far stronger evidence base than exists for many other cardiovascular interventions. They cite the recent meta-analyses showing that TAVR reduces death and disabling stroke compared with surgery, particularly in the early years after the procedure. The authors also emphasize that guideline-level evidence does not require superiority. Non-inferiority with improved safety and recovery can justify strong recommendations, especially for a less invasive procedure. And they note, quote, Given that TAVR is dramatically less invasive than SAVR, non-inferiority appears to be sufficient to support Class 1 recommendations, end of quote. They acknowledge the risk of indication creep, such as TAVR in younger patients or those with bicuspid valves, but argue that this should be addressed with new trials, not by discounting existing evidence. Ultimately, they see TAVR as a life-saving, transformative therapy that improves access and outcomes, and they caution against overcorrection in the face of evolving data. And the final viewpoint, low-risk aortic valve replacement at the crossroads of evidence, by Mahaffey, Dagbubadi, and Badwar. This viewpoint strikes a more cautionary tone. The authors acknowledge the historic impact of TAVR, but focus on the unintended consequence of its expansion into low-risk and younger populations, particularly those under age 65 and with bicuspid valves. They point to a disconnect between guidelines and clinical practice, with rising TAVR use in patients never studied in the pivotal trials. Registry data now show increasing one-year mortality and stroke rates post-TAVR, and the risk appears to accumulate over time. They write, quote, "Unlike following SAVR, where the risk is primary procedural, TAVR risk appears to be cumulative over time," end of quote. They raise concerns about early structural valve deterioration, increased TAVR explantation rates, and underpowered or absent data on valve and valve re-interventions. They also highlight the growing reliance on composite surrogate endpoints and shifting evidentiary thresholds, arguing that these trends dilute the rigor of clinical science. Their message is clear. Innovation must be balanced by restraint, transparency, and patient-centered rigor. They echo Call's call for reassessment of the guidelines and urge the community to proceed with clarity and care. So you can see these are unlikely to be the last words on these topics, but it gives you a sense of quite a diversity of viewpoints about low-risk aortic valve replacement in younger populations. That's it for this week's original research highlights in JACC. If you have feedback on this format or suggestions about how I can make it more useful to you, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and thank you for being a JACC reader and supporter. Until next time, stay curious.